Mentally strong people do not become powerful because of what they show in public, but because of what they refuse to expose. The strongest minds often appear ordinary, yet they silently avoid behaviors that weaken perception and control. Most people assume strength is expressed through dominance, but the truth operates in reverse. Public behavior reveals internal structure, not confidence itself. Many feel exhausted because their mind reacts automatically to judgment, comparison, and attention, creating invisible pressure in daily life. Insights from behavioral psychology and Jungian analysis traditions suggest that mental stability is built through omission rather than expression. In the next moments, a hidden pattern behind emotional control and psychological discipline will reshape how strength is understood in public behavior, revealing why some minds remain unshakable while others collapse under invisible observation. Mental strength in public spaces is often misinterpreted as loud confidence or visible dominance. Yet deeper psychological observation suggests something more subtle. Mentally strong individuals tend to regulate what they express rather than amplify what they feel. Public environments act like psychological mirrors, where internal instability becomes visible through speech, posture, and reaction timing. This does not mean suppression of emotion, but selective expression shaped by awareness. Modern behavioral psychology frames this as cognitive filtering, where the brain reduces unnecessary social signaling to preserve internal clarity. Instead of reacting to every stimulus, the mind creates distance between impulse and expression. This creates an external calm that is often mistaken for emotional detachment, though internally it is structured awareness. When perception is examined more closely, public behavior becomes a form of identity construction. What is shown externally often reinforces internal belief systems. Mentally strong individuals avoid reinforcing unstable narratives through social performance. They do not rush to prove value, because validation loops can gradually weaken psychological independence. From a neuroscience perspective, emotional regulation is tied to prefrontal control over limbic response systems. This means that reaction delay itself becomes a form of intelligence. The less immediate the reaction, the more space exists for interpretation instead of impulse. Yet complexity arises when silence or restraint is misinterpreted as weakness or emotional distance. Social environments reward visibility, not internal stability. This creates tension between authenticity and perception management. Mentally strong individuals operate within this contradiction without fully resolving it. In Jungian frameworks of symbolic psychology, public behavior is not just communication, but energy distribution of attention. What is withheld becomes just as important as what is expressed. But the deeper question remains unresolved: whether true strength is freedom of expression or mastery of controlled absence. The most mentally strong people are not defined by what they do in public, but by what they consistently refuse to do. This creates an unexpected contradiction. Strength appears as absence rather than action. While society values expression, psychological resilience often grows in restraint. Public behavior becomes misleading when interpreted literally. Confidence is not always visible, and visibility is not always confidence. As this pattern is examined deeper, it becomes unclear whether these individuals are controlling their behavior or simply no longer participating in reactive cycles that others unconsciously follow. The line between discipline and detachment begins to blur. Some behavioral models suggest that repeated exposure to social evaluation rewires emotional response thresholds, making reactions less necessary over time. Yet this raises a deeper uncertainty. Is mental strength a learned control system or a gradual disappearance of reactive identity itself? Even more intriguing is the possibility that what appears as emotional mastery may actually be a shift in perception, where external validation loses structural importance. If this is true, then public behavior is not being managed, it is being outgrown. But another layer remains hidden beneath this interpretation, suggesting that even silence may carry forms of influence not immediately visible. The subconscious mind can be understood as an invisible operating system running beneath conscious awareness, continuously shaping behavior, emotional response, and interpretation of social reality. In this framework, Public actions are not isolated decisions, but outputs generated by deeper cognitive architecture. Mental strength emerges when this system becomes partially observable to itself, allowing certain automatic reactions to be interrupted before expression. Rather than suppressing emotion, the mind begins to recognize patterns before they crystallize into behavior. This creates a gap between impulse and action, where awareness can intervene without force. Psychological research in cognitive behavioral models supports this idea by showing that awareness alone can reduce reactive intensity. Perception does not simply reflect reality, it organizes it. The brain filters incoming data through expectation, memory, and emotional association. What is considered real in social interaction is often a constructed interpretation rather than objective observation. Mentally strong individuals appear to operate with reduced distortion in this filtering process. They are less influenced by imagined judgment loops and more grounded in present moment interpretation. This shift does not eliminate perception bias, but reduces its emotional dominance. Behavioral patterns in public spaces are often automated responses shaped by repetition. Social validation, fear of rejection, and identity reinforcement act as programming layers that guide expression. Over time, these layers can override intentional decision-making. Mental strength develops when these patterns become visible to the mind itself. Instead of reacting through habitual scripts, the individual begins to recognize the script before it executes. This creates a state where behavior is no longer fully automatic. From a psychological perspective, this process aligns with metacognition and emotional regulation. However, in symbolic interpretations influenced by Jungian thought traditions, it can also be described as observing the structure behind identity formation. This does not imply supernatural mechanisms, but rather a shift in awareness where internal processes are seen as constructed rather than absolute. Even in analytical neuroscience, similar ideas appear in studies of self-referential cognition and predictive processing models of the brain. In this view, mental strength is not suppression or enhancement of emotion, but recognition of the system producing emotional experience. Yet the system itself remains partially hidden, suggesting that complete awareness may never fully stabilize into a final state. In everyday environments, certain patterns repeat quietly beneath social interaction. A person may enter a space with internal stability, yet subtle external cues begin reshaping attention. Small shifts in tone, facial expression, or comparison triggers can activate silent internal pressure. The mind begins adjusting behavior not through conscious decision, but through automated alignment with perceived expectations. These patterns often include hesitation before speaking, overanalysis of responses, and silent correction of natural expression. Public settings become environments where internal clarity is repeatedly tested by invisible standards that are never explicitly defined. Over time, this creates a form of cognitive fatigue, where awareness is split between authentic expression and imagined interpretation of others. Emotional responses are not fully expressed, nor fully suppressed, but partially redirected into internal dialogue. This produces a subtle disconnection between intention and behavior. The individual may appear composed externally while internally processing layers of self-evaluation. What feels like personality is often a negotiation between internal impulse and social prediction. In this context, mental strength is not absence of emotion, but reduced dependency on reactive validation cycles. Recognition of these patterns does not immediately resolve them, but it changes how they are experienced. The shift begins not in behavior, but in awareness of how behavior is being constructed moment by moment. Awareness of public behavior can shift when attention is redirected from expression to observation of internal processes that generate expression. Instead of reacting automatically to social environments, the mind begins to register the sequence between perception, interpretation, and response. This creates a subtle distance where behavior is no longer fully identical with impulse. Within this space, emotional reactions become visible as temporary constructions rather than fixed truths. Social pressure, judgment, anticipation, and identity reinforcement begin to lose their immediate authority. The mind observes rather than merges with these patterns. This does not require suppression or control, but a steady recognition of how thought organizes itself before becoming action. Over time, this recognition alters how public presence is experienced, reducing unnecessary internal tension. What emerges is not perfection of behavior, but increased transparency of mental processes shaping it. The shift remains gradual, and its depth is not immediately measurable, but the structure of perception begins to reorganize quietly beneath conscious attention. Mental strength in public space is rarely what it appears to be. It is formed in unseen intervals between thought and reaction, where identity is no longer fully dependent on external reflection. What is not expressed often carries more structure than what is shown. Over time, perception itself begins to reorganize around silence, awareness, and controlled absence. The mind stops chasing visibility and starts observing its own construction. In that shift, behavior becomes lighter, less reactive, more precise. Yet nothing is fully resolved, because awareness continues unfolding beyond fixed definition. What remains is not performance, but recognition of how performance was ever assembled. And in that recognition, something quiet becomes unshakable. Mental strength is not what is displayed, it is what no longer needs to be.